Hello, this is Mac with Mac Commentary and Bob. Bob, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing just fine, Mac. How are you?
Great. It's been another great day. We've got sunshine, and that's the beautiful part of it. And the temperature is a nice autumn temperature.
Yes, it is. It's unusual for Michigan.
Yeah, that's good too. Bob, I was just, we had planned to talk somewhat about the education of our children in this current society. And we see a lot of things going wrong throughout the nation with the education of most of our black kids. I mean, we're not going to say that all black kids are not getting a good, proper education, because we know that many of our kids are getting very good education, but so many are falling through the cracks, so to speak, using that analogy. I know that one of your questions that you had proposed some time ago was, do children need education reform? And we're talking about black children, to be specific. Do children need education reform other than reading, writing, and arithmetic? Or is this an adult concept contrived in order to keep children as ignorant as the adults proposing the reform? What do you mean by that, Bob?
Well, Mac, I've watched this so-called education reform for probably the last 40 years or so, and particularly here in the city of Detroit. I've watched the school system just continue to go from a level of a very good system to what I guess many in education, and mind you, I am not an educator, so my perspective is that of a layman. But I've heard it said by educators that the Detroit system is one of the worst in the nation. Now, I ask myself, why is that? Because I remember, 10, 15 years ago, when Detroit needed a bond, and they got a bond passed for $1 billion. And I remember then they were talking about how this was going to help education and help educate the kids and so forth. And it was the first time, I think, that they had ever gotten a $1 billion bond issue passed in the city of Detroit. And I saw that, and then after, several years later, things continued to deteriorate, and yet I have never seen, I'll say this, I have never seen a time when the people of Detroit have been asked to approve a bond question for more money, where they have negated it, where they've said, no, we don't agree with that. We're not going to give them the money. I think if you check the record, every time the citizens of Detroit have been asked to approve money for education, they have approved it. Now, why is that? I think the reason is because black people know that the most important tool that a child has to get himself or herself out of poverty and into the structure of the capitalist system in America is through the educational process. Because whether I like it or not, you still are going to be the last hired and the first fired. And in order to be the last hired, you've got to have an education. So now, let me couple that with this question of reform. And if you look at throughout that process of raising all this money, you have these educators saying, well, we need to reform education. We need to do this. The kids, they're not, they're having problems speaking English, so they should learn how to speak Ebonics. We've got something called a new math, where I guess 1 and 1 equals 3. I don't know. I'm just using. I know that sounds farcical, but I don't know what the new math is. I don't know what Ebonics is, but I know what reading, writing, and arithmetic are, because those are the things that were taught, and I think are still taught. And I think and it's the foundation of your house that you're building. If you build your house on a sound foundation, just like with the 3 little pigs, the big bad wolf can huff and puff, but he can't blow your house down. So what I mean by that is that I think that many of these so-called reformers who are ignorant, or really perhaps don't even give a damn as to whether or not the kids should get a proper education or not, come up with these reforms, and yet the education system itself continues to deteriorate back.
Well, Bob, I don't know. I think I look at the education system in the urban areas of the north and south and other parts of the country as being pretty good, decent school systems. I mean, do you think it's all just based on the teaching methods that they are using, or do you think it has a lot to do with the parents? I can remember going to a segregated school, and we didn't have anything that was comparable to the white schools in that particular area, but we had good teachers. And most of the people that graduated with me, they went on to have pretty much successful lives and careers. I'm just wondering, does it have something to do with the home life of the kids? I mean, the parents. I mean, maybe they're not taking the active part in their children's education. You think it might be the parents not motivating their kids, or not making sure that their children are doing their homework, or they are applying themselves in school?
I think that that's a major component, and I agree with you that the home environment is where it all starts, because the kid or the child coming out of that home environment where the parent is encouraging the child to get the education and is providing the stimuli to assure that child is excited about reading, is excited about doing his homework, is going to carry over into the classroom. And I heard Dr. Ben Carson, who was my presidential candidate and hopefully will become my next president. I heard him say this, that when he was a youngster, he and his brother, his mother used to have them write a book report, read a book, and then write a book report for her. And he said that at the time he didn't even know that his mother could read, but that he through this process, it got him to believing and understanding that everything that was going to happen that was good to him, he was going to have to bring it about himself. Well, it's almost a self-actuating process. If you live in an environment, and I don't care if it's a poor environment, because as he tells it, he came from one of the poorest environments in Southwest Detroit, having gone to Southwestern High School. And look, I think he's an outstanding human being today, as many of our people are. And there's still little Ben Carson's running around some of these areas in the city of Detroit right now. But to go back to the point that you made, I think that many of these educators, so-called, they took advantage of that $1 billion bond issue 15, 20 years ago, and they really, while they may mouth a certain concern for those children, their real concern is to, get themselves lifted up into a material society. And the teachers that you had when you were down there in a segregated system, if they had a $1 billion bond issue like they had in Detroit, I bet you they would have thought about assuring that you all did have the same tools as the white schools had. You would have had to use secondhand books. You would have had proper toilets, and you would have had fine buildings. Here in the city of Detroit, many of these people down here, these administrators, what they do is they take that $1 billion bond issue, they give themselves fat raises, they go out and buy fine cars, and the little kid that's walking to school with holes in his shoes, they could care less about.
Well, we had good buildings. There was no problem with the building. We had a brand new building practically that my high school did, and so did my elementary school. It was just that I'm talking about the equipment that they had in the schools for science projects and different things like that. We had bands. We had one of the best bands in the state, but we still lacked things that they had in the high schools as far as teaching tools, put it like that, and libraries and stuff like that. We even our the biggest library in town was segregated, so we couldn't even utilize that for research. But true enough, I don't know what's the whole factor here, but I know that like you said, Ben Carson, how his mother was able to inspire them to do well in school. I think that's the same thing, that you gotta have that can-do attitude right in Michigan and other parts of this country where our kids are. But I think one of the biggest failure causing our kids to fail today, and this is just my belief, Bob, I think it's the gangster rap type, the music out there today. I mean, I think that is one of our biggest things. And I don't see anybody trying to stop this invasion of this type of a genre of music, if you want to call it music, from infiltrating the community and infiltrating the minds of the young people, and make them think that that everything is about dollar signs, sex, and bling bling. And if you keep hearing that enough, you're not going to think about any books. You're going to think that you can become a rapper and make this type of money that these people are making. That's what I think is one of the biggest problems that we are facing right now. But,
well, I think that's a big part of it, but I still think that it starts in the home, and with the right kind of foundation in the home, it will spread out into the neighborhood and then into the community at large. And I think that many of these rappers, you got to remember that they were once children as well, and so where did they come from? How did they get to where they are? And then once they got to where they are today, many of them are making millions of dollars, and the cultural institutions, the so-called representative institutions, like the Urban League, like the NAACP, and whomever else, they see them as role models because when they make their millions of dollars, they'll go to these institutions, these cultural institutions, and they'll say, look, I want to get a lifetime service award, so here's $1 million for your coffers. And yet the people accepting that money, they'll know that these rappers are putting out this kind of degenerative material that is and I'm gonna use an educator's word. This is for all your teachers out there that are listening. It's the antithesis of what they should be doing. For the kids, and they know that, but yet they don't care because they feel that it's easy to mouth. Somewhere I read back that it says if a man's heart is good, his mouth will spew good. But if a man's heart is evil, it's not going to do anything to spew evil. So, and you can't spew good from an evil heart. So, you have a lot of people out here who consistently, you can't spew good from an evil heart consistently. Well, they can go out here and spew good for a while, and that may just be a time frame long enough to destroy the minds of a lot of these youngsters who, as you say, are affected by it, and it's a sad commentary on the black race. I mean, it's kind of a scourge on the black race. But I haven't, I'm no spring chicken, and I've seen a lot in my lifetime. But I think that our race, the black race in America, is on. I thought we were ascending. This roller coaster called capitalism in America, but for some reason, as the coaster was headed up, it seemed to hit a bump, and now it's headed back down toward the bottom of the bottom of the slope, and it does not bode well for our people.
Well, there's a lot of factors involved in this, Bob, I believe, and I think there are a lot of factors at work in this. But I also believe that once I had a young man to tell me that he is the product of his environment. He was about 24 years old. Said he was born poor. His parents was broke. And he lived in a bad area, and that's why he's the way he is. But I told him, I said, wait. I said, you know right from wrong now, don't you? He said, yes, I do. I said, well, then you can make a choice, right? You can do right or you can do wrong. So, I mean, you don't have to worry about how you were at one time. It's what you are today and how you can make your life better. And I think I say that to say that as black people, no matter what white people did to us in the past, we today know who we are and what we are, and we should be able to correct any situation that we were in the past to a better situation that we want for ourselves and our offsprings for the future. So we can make a choice now. We can think about rebuilding our communities and not waiting for handouts from what may be perceived that they owe us. I agree that reparation is something that we should have gotten and we should get, but we can't wait around for that. We have an opportunity now to work together and try to build our communities and get rid of all this negative rap. If anything these rappers wanted to do for us, I think one of the biggest things they could do is to invest in the black communities and start putting businesses in there to hire blacks. I mean, most of the whites in this country, they work in small businesses in their communities. That's the majority of employees in this country. And we can do the same thing in our communities as well. Now, Bob, I want to ask you a question here. You talked earlier about how much about the money that is spent, the $1 billion that was bond issue that was issued there in Detroit. Why? Let me ask you this: how much money is spent on educating American children per child compared to children in other countries where the education achievement level is much higher than in America?
I don't know the answer to that question, Mac, but I would say this. I would guess, but I'm going to look that up and find that out, but I would guess that in many of these other countries around the world, the per student payout for education is much less than it is in America. Now, let's talk about Michigan, for example. This may be, it's a number that I've heard, and I don't know how accurate this statement is. But I think that they pay out about $7,000 per child in the state of Michigan. And so if and I think that that's what encourages many of this so-called charter school movement. Because let's say if I could get 1,000 students, let's assume that is the right number, $7,000 per child, and I could start a school with 1,000 students, that'd be a $7 million budget. And so I could, and I have certain standards I have to live by. And it has no bureaucracy. I don't have administrators and so forth that are buying big cars and Maseratis and so forth. But I have a group of teachers, like the teachers that you had in the South, and some of the teachers I had because I'm a product of the Detroit public school system myself, albeit I was back in the 50s. You have some dedicated teachers back then. So let's say you take that $7 million budget, you say, okay, well, we're going to pay them this, this, and this. And their objective is to show that Mac or little Bob gets the best education they can, and they're in communication with your parents and my parents. That's what happens. The child comes out with a sound foundation. And I think that's what happens in these schools where they're not putting the kind of money per child in some of the... I think I heard somewhere where the schools in the Orient, Asian schools or Asian pupils, do much better than American students. And I would be willing to bet that they don't spend the kind of money per child that we spend here in America. Why that is, I don't know.
Well, I believe they probably emphasize the basic 3 R's, as you stated earlier, and they get that basic level of education, and they can go from there. But yes, I know that there are school districts in some of the wealthy communities where they spend $13,000 per year on per child.
Wow!
I believe some are 12,000, and I believe Detroit is somewhere around 8,000.
Oh, okay.
Based on what I've read. So there is something like that. There are some figures out there that you can find. One other question, Bob, is the ignorance of parents being placed upon their children because parents are following ignorant leaders whose motive is to keep more people ignorant than themselves?
I think so, Mac. And we had an example of that, and we see it. That we as black people have a very strong allegiance, and we should have, to the black church, because it helped us out of slavery, and it helps us today. But you have a lot of blacks today who are leaders in the black church who are leading our people in ways that are extremely degrading, degenerative, and just completely unhealthy. I'll give you an example. You and I talked about this here several days ago, where they this person at the City of God Church shot and killed one of his parishioners because the preacher had I'll call him a charlatan preacher, had impregnated the guy's wife, because I went and looked at it afterwards, and I guess she miscarried the baby, and that's what he was going to confront her with. Well, I don't want to go back into that, but I want to say this. He is considered a leader in that church, and you have hundreds of churches like that where you have so-called leaders. Now, those parents are taking information from that leader, and they're taking it home to their kids. And so it's a self-destructive process that the whole family is being exposed to by this degenerate type of leadership that is being foisted upon on the child by the ignorant parent. And the people who and it goes. It's such a major problem, Mac, that it's very disheartening when you see this among our people. We are, you know something, Mac, and this may upset some of your audience, but I don't care. We, as black people, many of us, we are one ignorant race of people, man. I know there's a lot of ignorant whites and other races too, but I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about us black people. And it goes all the way back to Africa, because I saw this after you and I talked about that degenerate preacher or that degenerate charlatan. I went on and looked at the internet, and there's some preachers over there in Africa telling their parishioners, their congregants, that they should wear panties and bras to church so that Jesus can come in. Now think of that. If that's what this charlatan, this degenerate is telling his women, who are the major influence on their children, they take that home and they tell their kids, well, honey, you don't need to wear panties, you don't need to wear a bra, because Jesus is going to come in. And then they go out into the neighborhood with that. Or they take that to school with them, Mac. That's a sad, sad circumstance for black people. It's the degradation of the race.
Well, we're gonna end that with that, Bob. And I'm going to research that, what you talked about with that preacher over in, you said it was in Africa, huh? Right,
and I don't remember the country, but he's a sick person. I almost said something that would not been nice, and you don't want to send over the airways, but that's sad, man.
What you were saying in us today, Bob, I guess after it's all said and done, what you have stated then is that we just need to honestly look at our own individual ignorance and determine how we can improve in order to assist the improvement of our children, grandchildren, and society in general, right?
Absolutely, Mac. Thank you for saying that.
Well, that was your words, and I just wanted to quote them. And thank you again, Bob, and have a great day, and I want to thank my audience, and we'll see you again next week.
And thank you, Mac.
Bye.
Listen to my love, baby. Would you come with an open heart and listen to my love?